Hey, welcome back, guys. I'm Top Black Musician Drummer, and welcome to episode number 7. Hello, my beautiful drummers and musicians. So, I just want to mention that this podcast episode is not made specifically just for drummers. So, if you're a drummer and you feel like that your musician friend is having a hard time sight reading, then share this with them and all that. They're going to help. Be thankful that you helped them out. So reading is super crucial for any musician, just in general, any musician, because it's the fine point to where it's like you have this ability or not. And with that in mind, it's can you keep your job or we have to get someone else. So it comes to this sometimes, and it's really sad. But reading is super important where it's like you're doing college stuff or where it's like you're out in the real world and you're playing for these, whether if it's venues or whether if it's actually a recording gig. And so during a recording gig, sometimes they don't have the music, sometimes they do. And if you do have the music, then you have a pretty good ear, then that's going to be an easy gig for you. But if you don't, it's super risky. It's super risky to just use your ear because sometimes you have to trust your intuition or second guess yourself. And so it's just a guessing game. It's a lot of stress, but sight reading is super crucial because you might get fired or you might keep the gig. So I'm helping y'all by giving you some tips and viewpoints on how to improve your sight reading. So a little bit of background about my sight reading is that I had the hardest time knowing note heads and the rhythms and just getting it stronger and stronger. So how I started out was I had flashcards of different note heads of just memorizing it and also rhythms. The first book I ever used for rhythm, specifically just for rhythm, was a book called, Understanding Rhythm, a guide to reading music by Michael Lauren. And this is what I give to my students to help them understand reading different rhythms, whether if it's complex or simple. This is really something to help out with that. And the publisher is Alfred and Manhattan Music Publications. So that's a really cool book to use with any of your students. So sight reading, back to it and all that. That's one of the books I use. And also there's another book too. There's a big book collection from Bruce Arnold. I'm not sure if it's still in print, but if it is, try to get one of those books. It actually helps your reading out a lot, especially if you're not a drummer. If you are a drummer, this might be a breeze, but might be some things that is like, whoa, what's that? And all that. And so try to practice that on a little bit. Try to repeat that idea and focus on that. So sight reading. So I'm just going to give you a couple of tips about sight reading. What are some elements about sight reading? But first I want to talk about the common misconceptions about sight reading. So one of the misconceptions is that you can only improve your sight reading by sight reading. And this is not true because sight reading is a complex task involving a variety of skills, which I will mention later. Each of these skills can be isolated and improved on, like reading music on a regular basis with good readers, like in the big bands, will actually help you too. However, very poor readers usually aren't included in these kinds of activities. Reading music by oneself is only helpful once a certain level of competence is achieved. So it's really important to be with other people when sight reading, because once you're with other good sight readers, you become a good sight reader. And so that's kind of like a little bit of a law of attraction type of thing, where it's you can only be a good drummer if you're with other good drummers. And so you want to be with the good crowd and not the bad crowd, because if you're with the bad crowd, then you become the bad crowd, because you are what you become, type of thing. So the next misconception I want to mention is you are reading music when you are performing and looking at music. So this is not usually true. Once we have rehearsed a piece music, whether it's big band and all that, once or twice, we are more than likely relying on our memory to remember how it is supposed to be, because we are learning it by notes. So this is a very incorrect thing to do, and this is the way the music is performed and how it is not reading music. The problem is that when we are put in a true sight reading situation, we will be less than successful unless we spend some time working on the skills, improving on the sight reading. If you make like silly errors in music, which you have played many times, you probably aren't really reading. And the next misconception is reading isn't really important in like playing, and that's not true. Like it's a skill, and it is greatly enjoyment of the music. And once your ability has gone higher, then you're able to play with high caliber musicians. So here are some of these levels or skills that are incorporated in sight reading. So you got pitch reading, you got rhythm reading, you got rest reading, measure awareness, ability to move the eye ahead, which is a big one, and ability to adjust to the ensemble. So the first thing is the pitch reading. So drummers, we don't have too much about pitch reading, but we do have cymbals. Other people, like guitar, piano, this is a big thing to where that you have to know where the notes are. So practice reading the pitches only and learn to recognize like some of the key centers, scales, arpeggios. And how you do this intellectually and kinesthetically to where that you actually think with your mind that, oh, this is the C. And sometimes when you've been playing the music for so long, you do it kinesthetically to you're like, oh, that's where my hand's supposed to be. Oh, that's where your muscle memorizes it. So there's basically two minds, and I do this with my teachings too, where it's like there's two minds. You know what a paradiddle is. You know it, but your body is stupid. And so you have to train your body to know this kinesthetically and intellectually. So practice analyzing the music on sight. And so that takes practice. Like the usual exercise I do for that is like, when I was in school, we had this library, like over at San Jack. Like sometimes I went to the closet where there's music in there. And so I just grabbed some, big band stuff and I just started sight reading without actually really knowing what the piece is. And so at any tempo, like I practice at like a certain tempo to where it's like reading tempo. So maybe it was like 80 BPM is the best I could read on sights. Whatever if it's, well, there's that. And there's so many different things to do, which is like you look at the piece, you try to figure out what are your potential hot spots, and you look over, it's like, that looks a little tricky, so I'm going to watch out for that. So you just look ahead. That's the big thing too. Now rhythm reading, and basically all these processes I'm saying right now, all the 6 are pretty much all these skills that you can work on. And so this is pretty much an area of people lack on. People lack on pitch reading, rhythm reading, rest reading, being aware of what a measure is, and moving the eye ahead and adjusting to the ensemble. So the next thing was rhythm reading, and it's important to feel the subdivision, because once you feel the subdivision, like you're able to feel the beats. And so, for example, like you have 8 notes and all, it's like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and sometimes it's really important to feel the subdivision. It's like and all that type of stuff. And sometimes it's really important to feel those subdivisions, because you might have something on the and it's like and all that. That was a little sloppy, but it's an example. Okay, don't judge me. I'm a drummer. And some of the common subdivisions as units are some of these, like half bar in duple, full bar duple, and with the ties, which is like within or over the bar line. And some of the common triplet and 16th note units are like some of the common ones to consider. Okay, next thing is rest reading. So it's important to know the rest, and there might be times Like, there might be times, like, especially when I was in my classical days, when I was learning Portraits in Rhythm, or what was that book? It was actually a doctoral book that I was very fortunate to actually play. And de Claude, can't remember at the moment, but it's like one of those really advanced books for snare drum, and you have to be good at like reading rest. And so that's one of the important things to do, is read the rest. So learn to read the rest, and learn to play like some of the common stuff, like subdividing the phrases that are ending or beginning. So it's really important, because that might trip, someone might accidentally do some weird syncopation type of thing. It's like, I don't know what that is. It's like, well, I'm going to get another guy that actually does. And so this is one of the things I mentioned. You better know everything, because you might get fired. Now, no one knows everything, but you want to be versatile as possible. So that's just like a little footnote. Is like, no one knows everything, and that's okay. But it's one of those moments. It's like, business is business. We need someone who knows this. So that's pretty much what I'm getting off with these things. So measure awareness, let's expand on that. So it's like keeping your place in the bar. So there's this thing that trumpet players do, is they tap their foot. They tap their foot. And so they pretty much like tap their foot on the downbeats, or sometimes they tap it on the ands. And so we drummers, we actually do this a lot in jazz, and sometimes we do it differently. Like if we're doing something from Tony Williams, then we do everything on all beats, or we do not do the hi-hat sometimes, and we just keep time on a ride. But for the trumpet players, you sometimes tap on down or the upbeats. And so on the upbeats, this is something you could probably practice on, and you could do some other things too, depending on what kind of release you do with your foot. So usually when you have your foot up, that's the downbeat, and it's an exercise. It's very tricky. Like when I was like trying to first incorporate that, I was like, okay, I have to land on the ands. No, you don't have to entirely do that. You can displace where you think the downbeat is. So you're displacing the feel. And so it's like on up. So with this, try to practice like the measure awareness, like playing like the parts in the bars. So you practice like doing the downbeats. You can practice this with the upbeats. Now whole beats is a tricky thing. And also beat groupings. So, but you want to tap for a reason, and I say that because sometimes there might be a trading four section. And so there might be a time where a drummer or someone's doing something, and then it's very obvious that people are tapping. So you want to be careful about the tapping. So you want to probably do it light. You want to do light tapping, because if you're not a drummer and if you're tapping and all that, we can hear you and all that. And it's disrupted the music, and also it's going to interfere with someone else, but it might. So you want to tap for a reason. All right, that's a big disclaimer. Okay, the big thing is moving the eye. So this is a big thing a lot of people are very discouraged about, and they have a hard time developing this. And so here's some things to consider when moving the eye. So basically, it's kind of like literally reading a book, where it's like you're sight reading and you're kind of looking ahead. It's like that. And so it's just like learning a different language. Man, I sound like that guy from The Big Bang Theory. And all that type of stuff. So first, like, if you have a piece of music and all that, like, just see if it repeats and all that. Like, for drummers, we have a lot of stuff repeating. So we pretty much memorize, okay, I'm going to play, like, this rock beat for 8 measures. And so that is actually moving your eye, technically. Because you're like, okay, I'm going to play for this. And then it's, like, going to be a fill on the 8th measure. And then, boom. And so you kind of do that. When you do that, you actually feel more connected with the music. So you read, this is another thing too, like if you're a melodic player, you're going to look at the music and you're going to kind of memorize it a little bit. It's like, okay, there was that pattern, and so I memorized that rhythm, and you can practice that and you look away. So Next thing is like a window reading, to where it's like you have this window of time to read. So you kind of look and you try to memorize a little bit of that, and you play, and then you go to the next thing. And it's like, oh, that's the next measure. Oh, that's a pretty cool lick. Oh, nice. 2-5-1s, and all that type of stuff. And you want to rehearse in the rest and all that. Like whenever you're taking a rest, like you look ahead, like you count how many measures you have, and sometimes you have the intuition, you hear what the form sounds like. So if it's like a blues, it's like, okay, I definitely know when my cue is like when that turnaround is da 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 and all that. Oh wait, that's sounded minor. Oh gosh. But you rehearsed in the rest. So like if you're not doing anything, this is a good time to look ahead. And a lot of people don't do this because they're kind of worried about, oh no, I'm not a good reader. And I was like, well, you have time now to look ahead and all that type of stuff. So the last thing is really important, is adjusting to the ensemble. So it's important when you're reading, maintain concentration. This has happened to me too. Like sometimes I get so focused on the sheet music that I'm not actually connected to the bands. And sometimes I'm thinking so much on the music that sometimes I drag, sometimes I rush, and sometimes I'm not doing appropriate fills. So you want to do that. You want to avoid some anxiety. Visualization is important. It's like if you don't realize that, then like you should realize that visualization is super important. It's like, okay, how is it going to look like when I play this piece? Oh, it's going to be so awesome and all that. And so it's build your hopes up so you can avoid the anxiety. And like that is just like some of the super useful tips to do for like sight reading. So those are just the basic things to help you develop your tools. So this is basically like a toolbox. And so in some of the books that I've mentioned, like Understanding Rhythm, A Guide to Reading Music, or like some books that are from Bruce Arnold, like these are really good practice to like just go through the book, set a metronome, and then actually just try to learn the rhythms. Or if you're doing notes, then just like go to there's this website I usually go to practice sight reading, and it's actually just basically getting classical music. I think it was AMLP and all that, where it's like you try to find imslp.org, and so that's just a resource where it's like everything's free, sheet music, where it's classical type of stuff, or where it's like you get hand-in exercises for piano. This is a really good resource for actually like sight reading. To where that you find the music, you download it, and it's like, oh, this is pretty cool. Okay, I'm going to work on D flat or something, or maybe something from Bolero, or all that. Bolero, yeah, you don't have to sight read for that. Like that's just so easy and the hardest thing to do in the classical world and drumming. But we'll get to that in maybe another episode. So I think that's pretty much it for today's episode. It's a little short than I wanted, but that's okay. So you got a lot of essential stuff, like you understand like what some of the misconceptions are, like you understand what the skill levels are for sight reading, and we went in depth with that, and some more resources and some pro tips about sight reading. And it's a skill, it's a practice, it's a technique. And this is my thing about technique and all that. If it's something you can practice on, it's a technique. And just like dynamics is a technique, listening is a technique, sight reading is a technique. So hopefully y'all enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to like rate and all that. That lets me know that you enjoyed this episode and all that. So I love to hear y'all's input, what you thought about the episode, and or ideas about future episodes. I'm definitely open to input and all that. So until next time, guys, I'm your drummer, and we'll see you in the next episode.